The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a dusky hue over Cedar Street as Emily and Jake Parker pulled their moving truck to a stop outside their new home. The Victorian house stood tall and proud, its dark wood siding softened by years of weathering. Ivy crept up the sides like a green hand reaching for the eaves, and the porch sagged slightly, giving the structure a weary appearance. But to Emily, it was perfect, an opportunity for a fresh start. As they unloaded boxes, the air felt thick, almost stagnant, like the weight of history lay heavy upon the house. Emily brushed off a twinge of unease, focusing instead on the excitement of beginning their life together. They giggled as they stumbled over packing tape and cardboard, filling the air with the sounds of youthful laughter. That first night, the couple fell into a restless sleep, exhausted from the move. But just as the clock struck 3:15 a.m., Emily awoke with a start, her heart racing inexplicably. A chill seeped into the room, creeping beneath the blankets and wrapping around her like a cold embrace. She glanced at Jake, sound asleep beside her, oblivious to the disquiet that had settled over the house. The stillness was unnerving, punctuated only by the faint creaking of the old wood settling under its own weight. Then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound, like the shuffle of feet on the floorboards above them. Her breath caught in her throat as she strained to listen, heart pounding. It was a sound that felt out of place in this once vibrant home, an echo of lives lived long before. Emily tried to rationalize it, telling herself that old houses made strange noises. The pipes could be expanding, or perhaps the wind was playing tricks. But deep down, a whisper of fear began to claw at her insides, urging her to wake Jake. Yet she remained frozen, trapped in a nightmare that felt too real. As the days went by, the sounds intensified. Emily found herself waking each night at 3:15 a.m. Each time more terrified than the last. The shuffling footsteps became distinct, as if someone was pacing back and forth in the hallway. And then one night, as she lay in bed, she detected the faint smell of cigarette smoke wafting through the air, wrapping around her like a shroud. No one in the house smoked, but the scent was undeniable, rich, stale, and tinged with a hint of desperation. The next day, feeling the need for distraction, Emily ventured out to meet their neighbors, hoping to find some sense of normalcy. It was during one such encounter that she met Mrs. Caldwell, a frail old woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through her. As they chatted over tea, Emily mentioned the odd noises, trying to gauge Mrs. Caldwell's reaction. Mrs. Caldwell's face shifted, her demeanor growing serious as she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This house has seen many people come and go, but not all of them have left." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emily's pulse quickened. What did she mean? The chill that had settled in her bones deepened, and she felt a shiver race down her spine. Emily left the conversation feeling uneasy, the words echoing in her mind. She looked back at the old house, its silhouette stark against the twilight sky, and a knot of dread twisted in her stomach. Something wasn't right here. With each passing day, the house seemed to watch her, its presence growing more oppressive, its history looming over her like a dark cloud. As she and Jake prepared for bed that night, she cast one last glance at the hallway, now shrouded in shadows. The quiet felt heavy, almost alive, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in the house on Cedar Street. The walls whispered secrets, and Emily could only hope they weren't the kind that could consume her. As the evening deepened, the familiar sense of dread loomed over Emily. Each creak of the house felt amplified in the quiet, as though it was relaying stories of its past, whispering in a language only it understood. She tucked herself under the covers, turning her back to Jake, who had already fallen asleep. His gentle snores filled the room, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that enveloped her. At exactly 3:15 a.m., Emily jolted awake again. This time the air was colder, and the smell of cigarette smoke was stronger. It felt as though a presence had entered the room, sitting heavy on her chest. The sounds from upstairs had returned, the slow, deliberate shuffle echoing down the hall like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. Her mind raced with thoughts. Was it a figment of her imagination? Just a trick of an old house? She finally mustered the courage to climb out of bed and tiptoe toward the door. The hallway was bathed in shadows, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the grimy window at the end of the corridor. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, and her heart thudded loudly in her ears, urging her to turn back. She stood at the bottom of the staircase, frozen as the sounds continued, soft yet unnerving. Slowly she ascended the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. As she reached the landing, the smell of smoke intensified, wrapping around her like a ghostly embrace. She peered down the hallway where the door to the second-floor bedroom stood slightly ajar, darkness spilling out like a hungry mouth waiting to consume her. Drawing a shaky breath, she approached the door, pushing it open just enough to peek inside. The room was dark and still, but something felt off. The shadows seemed to flicker, as if they were alive, moving with a rhythm that matched her racing heart. She took a step back, overwhelmed by a sense of foreboding, the realization that she was intruding into a space that belonged to someone else. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, causing Emily to jump back, heart racing. The noise reverberated like a gunshot, and the old wooden frame of the house groaned in response. She stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs as she rushed back to her bedroom. Bursting into the room, she slammed the door behind her, leaning against it as if that thin barrier could protect her from whatever had just stirred in the shadows. Jake stirred awake, bleary-eyed. "Emily, what's wrong?" he murmured, concerned but still half asleep. She struggled to catch her breath, desperately searching for words. "I heard something. I think there's someone in the house." Jake groaned, running a hand through his hair. "It's just an old house, Em. They creak and moan. You're probably just tired." But Emily could see the flicker of worry in his eyes, a small crack in his bravado. They fell into silence, the weight of the night hanging heavily between them. The rhythmic sound of the old house settling became a constant in the background, a reminder that they were in a space that had seen much more than their brief lives. That night, sleep eluded Emily. The darkness in the house seemed to pulse with life, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The cigarette smoke, once a distant memory, now felt like an intruder, a tangible reminder of the house's haunting past. As dawn broke and the first rays of light crept through the window, Emily vowed to discover the truth behind the strange occurrences. Little did she know that her search would unearth more than just the history of a lonely man. It would peel back the layers of time, revealing the dark, twisted stories that lingered in the shadows of Cedar Street. The following day, Emily felt a restless energy coursing through her veins. The sun streamed through the windows, bathing the rooms in a warm glow that felt at odds with the cold dread that still clung to her. Determined to understand the strange occurrences, she decided to dig deeper into the house's history, hoping to find some answers that could ease her growing anxiety. With Jake at work, Emily ventured into the dusty attic, a place that had become a personal sanctuary for her exploration. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and an old box she had discovered among the clutter, she climbed the narrow staircase leading up to the dimly lit space. The air grew thick with dust and the scent of aged wood, each breath a reminder of the house's long-forgotten stories. As she rummaged through the box, her fingers brushed against brittle papers, yellowed photographs, and other forgotten relics. Among the items, she found a diary, its leather cover cracked with age. The journal belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house alongside her husband, Charles Wiggins, in the 1950s. Intrigued, Emily began to read, her eyes scanning the delicate handwriting that flowed across the pages. Margaret's entries revealed a life filled with love, hope, and ultimately, heartbreak. The couple had been inseparable until the tragic death of Margaret, who had succumbed to illness, leaving Charles utterly devastated. As Emily continued to read, she could feel the sorrow radiating from the pages, the pain of a man who had lost his world. The last entry spoke of Charles's despair, hinting at his deepening loneliness and a growing fixation on the memories of his wife. Suddenly, the comforting warmth of the sun seemed to flicker, and an unexplainable chill swept through the attic. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she heard the faint shuffling sound again, echoing from the hallway outside. Her heart raced, pounding against her chest as the realization struck. She wasn't alone. With trepidation, she placed the diary back in the box and crept toward the attic door. The soft whispers of the house seemed to swirl around her, echoing like memories in a forgotten space. As she slowly opened the door, the sounds intensified, becoming clearer. It was as if someone was pacing back and forth, lost in thought. Steeling herself, Emily stepped onto the creaking floorboards of the upper hallway. She felt the cold draft wrap around her like fingers, urging her to retreat. But she pressed on, following the sound until she stood at the threshold of the second-floor bedroom, the same room where she had sensed the presence before. The door swung open, revealing a scene that made her blood run cold. The room appeared untouched, but the air buzzed with tension. A faint glow emanated from the window, casting elongated shadows across the floor. In the corner, she spotted a chair that appeared to have been recently occupied, though no one was there. And then she saw it. The remnants of cigarette ash scattered on the windowsill, tiny evidence of a life still clinging to the room. A wave of nausea washed over her as she realized that Charles's presence was not just a figment of her imagination. He was here, trapped in the web of his own sorrow, unable to move on from the memories that held him captive. Panicked, she rushed back to the safety of her bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sank to the floor, breathing heavily, grappling with the reality that the house wasn't just old. It was haunted by the weight of a tragic love story that refused to let go. When Jake returned home, Emily recounted her findings, hoping to draw him into her urgency. However, he remained skeptical, attributing her fears to the emotional strain of moving. "It's just a house, Em. You're working yourself up over nothing," he insisted, though the flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed his words. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Each night she lay awake, haunted by the shuffling footsteps and the whisper of smoke. She began to feel a deep connection to Charles, a yearning to understand his pain. In her dreams, she saw flashes of his life, glimpses of a man who had once loved deeply but had been consumed by loss. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily visited the local library, where she sought any records of Charles Wiggins. The librarian, an elderly woman with a knowing smile, provided her with newspaper clippings and old photographs. Emily learned of the town's perception of Charles as a recluse, a man who had retreated into solitude after losing his beloved wife. The images of Charles showed a weary man with haunted eyes, a stark contrast to the joy reflected in Margaret's pictures. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Emily felt a surge of empathy for the spirit that seemed to linger in her home. She realized that his story was not just one of sorrow, but also of unfulfilled love and lingering attachment. The fear that had once gripped her began to morph into compassion, an understanding that she could not shake. That night, as she prepared for bed, Emily made a choice. She would reach out to the presence that haunted her, not in fear, but with the hope of freeing him from his despair. The lingering cigarette smoke, the footsteps in the night, they were not threats, but echoes of a life yearning to be heard, a ghost trapped in the memories of a love lost. With resolve in her heart, she waited for the clock to strike 3:15 a.m. Once more, ready to confront the past that had seeped into her present. The clock ticked ominously as Emily prepared herself for what lay ahead. She sat up in bed, a mixture of fear and resolve coursing through her. The stillness of the house was palpable, each creak and whisper magnified in the silence. As the hour approached, she closed her eyes and focused on her breath, steadying herself against the anxiety that churned within. At exactly 3:15 a.m., Emily felt the familiar chill creep into the room, a cold finger tracing along her spine. The air grew heavy, and the suffocating scent of stale cigarette smoke enveloped her. Her heart raced as she listened intently. The shuffling footsteps began again, moving slowly outside her door, echoing with a melancholy rhythm that resonated deep in her bones. Summoning her courage, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cold wood against her feet. The shadows seemed to beckon her, urging her to step into the unknown. With each tentative step toward the door, she felt as if she were being pulled by an unseen force, drawn to the heart of the haunting. As she opened the door, the hallway was cast in darkness, and she felt the unmistakable presence of someone or something waiting for her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out, her heart pounding in her ears. The footsteps paused, as if recognizing her approach, and a wave of sadness washed over her, filling the air like an unspoken plea. Emily moved toward the second-floor bedroom, drawn by the weight of the past. As she stepped inside, she gasped. The room, bathed in an ethereal glow, seemed alive. The air shimmered with an energy she had never felt before. A figure stood at the window, backlit by the moonlight, its form almost translucent. "Charles?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that seemed familiar, yet weathered by time. A reflection of the man she had seen in the old photographs. The sadness in his eyes struck her with a profound sense of empathy. "Why do you linger?" she asked, her voice a soft echo in the stillness. "I am alone," he replied, his voice a mere whisper carried on the breeze. "She is gone, and I cannot find peace." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she realized the depth of his sorrow. This wasn't just a ghost. It was a man trapped in a cycle of grief, lost in the memories of a love that had defined his existence. "You're not alone," she urged, stepping closer. "You can let her go." As she spoke, the air thickened and the room darkened. The ghostly figure flickered, his form wavering like a candle flame in the wind. The shadows swirled around them, and Emily felt a cold breeze rush past her, filling her with an overwhelming sense of desperation. "Please," she pleaded, reaching out toward him. "You don't have to suffer like this. She wouldn't want you to be trapped here." In that moment, the space seemed to shift, and the room filled with the sound of laughter, soft and melodic, like a distant memory. A woman's voice echoed, familiar yet hauntingly sad. "Charles, my love, find peace," it whispered, reverberating through the air. Emily felt the energy in the room swell, a tidal wave of emotions crashing over her. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment, letting the memories wash over her like rain. Images flashed before her, a life shared, a love that had burned bright but was now dimmed by grief. Suddenly, Charles's form flickered again, more pronounced this time. His eyes met hers, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. "But I cannot." "She was my everything," he murmured, the shadows around him twisting with anguish. "You can honor her by living," Emily urged, her voice breaking with emotion. "You need to let her go. She wants you to be free." At that moment, the shadows seemed to dissipate, swirling around him like a restless wind. The laughter grew louder, filling the space with warmth, an echo of the life they had shared. Charles took a step back, his figure shimmering like the morning mist. "You are brave," he whispered, and in his voice she could hear the stirrings of acceptance. As the final echoes of the laughter faded, Emily watched as Charles's form began to dissolve into the air, his essence blending with the light. A sense of peace washed over her, enveloping her like a gentle embrace. The cigarette smoke dissipated, replaced by a fresh breeze that filled the room, carrying with it the essence of release. For a fleeting moment, she felt his presence lingering, no longer heavy with sorrow, but lightened by the love that had bound him to the earth. And then he was gone, leaving behind only a soft glow and the sweet smell of blooming lilacs, a fragrance that had once filled the house with joy. Emily stood alone in the room, the silence profound but not suffocating. She had reached across the veil and touched a soul in need, and in doing so, she had also confronted her own fears of loss and solitude. As she left the room, she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. The house no longer felt like a prison, but rather a sanctuary of memories, both painful and beautiful. But as she turned to head back to her bedroom, a shadow flickered at the corner of her eye. Doubt crept back into her mind. What if this wasn't truly the end? What if other remnants of the past still clung to the walls, waiting for someone to set them free? In that moment, the air shifted again, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the house had not finished telling its story. The glow of dawn broke through the window, spilling light across the room as Emily stood in stunned silence, grappling with the weight of what had just transpired. She felt a deep sense of relief mixed with trepidation, as though the air around her had shifted and released a long-held breath. But as she stepped away from the second-floor bedroom, the shadows crept back, whispering secrets that were not yet revealed. Despite her belief that she had freed Charles, unease twisted in her gut. The lingering sensation of being watched returned, heavier now, like a shroud over her shoulders. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, teasing her with the notion that perhaps not all was as it seemed. She turned to look back into the room, but it was just a room now, empty, yet still thick with an unsettling energy that suggested unfinished business. The day passed slowly. Emily tried to shake off the tension, yet each creak of the house seemed louder, each whisper more pronounced. As twilight descended, she resolved to confront whatever was still lingering, convinced that the peace she had given Charles might have stirred something else awake. As night fell, the air grew dense with expectation, and Emily felt her pulse quicken. She settled on the couch in the living room, attempting to keep her mind occupied, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the dark corners of the house. Finally, just as the clock struck 3:15 a.m. once more, she felt the familiar chill engulf her, the weight of the shadows returning with a vengeance. It began with a soft tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingers drumming against the surface. Emily's heart raced as she glanced toward the hallway, where the sound seemed to originate. She stood, compelled to investigate, each step echoing through the silence as if the house itself were holding its breath. As she reached the base of the staircase, the tapping morphed into frantic knocking, like an urgent call for help. The sensation of dread coiled tightly in her chest as she hesitated, torn between fear and the instinct to understand. She glanced over her shoulder, contemplating retreat, but the call of the unknown pulled her forward. Emily ascended the stairs, the tapping intensifying with each step, growing louder, more insistent. The energy in the house shifted again, a whirlwind of desperation and anguish that made her skin prickle. Reaching the second-floor landing, she stood before the door to the bedroom, now shut tight. "Charles?" she called softly, fearing the answer, but needing to know. "Is that you?" The room remained silent, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the panic well up inside her. Had she unleashed something she couldn't control? The knocking grew more forceful, reverberating against the wood, echoing in her bones. It felt almost as if an unseen force was urging her to enter, to confront whatever darkness lingered inside. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was shrouded in darkness, but the air felt charged with an unsettling energy. She flipped on the light switch, and the bulbs flickered hesitantly before illuminating the space, revealing the remnants of her earlier encounter: the empty chair, the window still open, the lingering scent of smoke and flowers. Then she saw it, a shadow in the corner, darker than the surrounding gloom, pulsating like a living thing. Emily's breath hitched in her throat, and she took a step back, heart racing. The shadow elongated, morphing into a more defined shape, a figure that resembled a woman, her hair disheveled, face obscured, but eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Margaret," Emily whispered, the name escaping her lips as if summoned by the apparition. The figure hovered in silence, its presence a chilling reminder of the tragic love story that had unfolded within these walls. As if sensing Emily's recognition, the specter lunged forward, filling the room with an icy wind that rattled the window panes. Emily felt a paralyzing fear gripping her, yet a part of her felt compelled to reach out, to understand the sorrow that had bound Margaret to this world. "Why are you still here?" Emily cried out, desperation lacing her voice. "What do you want?" Margaret's form flickered, her expression shifting from sadness to anger in a heartbeat. The air thickened, and Emily felt a surge of energy, as if the house itself was vibrating with the intensity of her emotions. "He left me," the figure wailed, the voice a haunting echo that filled the room. "He chose to forget. I am the one who suffered." The room darkened as the spirit's anguish became palpable, wrapping around Emily like a suffocating fog. Memories flooded the space, visions of Margaret in happier times, then twisted into images of her decline, surrounded by shadows of despair. The oppressive weight of sorrow bore down on Emily, making it hard to breathe. "No," Emily shouted over the wailing, her own heart aching with empathy. "He loved you, he wanted to be with you, but you need to let him go." The spirit's fury seemed to ignite, the shadows swirling around her like a tempest. "He cannot forget," Margaret screamed, the anguish reverberating off the walls. "I will not allow him to move on while I remain in this place." With newfound determination, Emily stepped forward, her own fear dissipating in the face of Margaret's pain. "You are not alone either. You can find peace. Don't you see? You both deserve to be free." As she spoke, a flicker of recognition crossed Margaret's face, a glimmer of the love that had once defined her existence. Emily reached out, extending her hand, willing to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. "You can honor your love by letting him go. Find your light, Margaret." The air crackled with energy, and Margaret's form began to shimmer, caught between worlds. The wailing turned to whispers, and the shadows thickened before bursting into a brilliant light. Emily shielded her eyes, feeling the heat and intensity as the energy swirled around her. In a climactic moment, the light enveloped Margaret, illuminating the room with a warmth that dispelled the chill. Emily could see the spirit's face, not twisted with rage but softening into acceptance, a serene smile emerging through the radiance. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, her voice now calm and gentle. And just like that, the light consumed her, leaving behind only the faint scent of lilacs and the fading echoes of laughter that once filled the house. The shadows receded, the oppressive weight lifted, and Emily was left standing in the now empty room, her heart racing and tears streaming down her face. The air felt lighter, and the house around her seemed to breathe, exhaling the sorrow that had long since settled into its walls. But as she turned to leave, she felt a presence beside her, a warmth that wrapped around her like a comforting hug. Emily glanced back and saw a figure standing in the doorway. But this time it was not a shadow, it was Charles. A gentle smile on his face, his eyes finally free of the weight of grief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude and love. With that, he faded into the light, leaving Emily with the lingering sense that she had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment of connection that transcended life and death. And yet, in the back of her mind, a new thought emerged. Was this truly the end? Or had she merely scratched the surface of the house's haunting history? The room fell into an overwhelming silence, the kind that carries with it the weight of everything left unsaid. Emily stood rooted in place, her heart still racing from the whirlwind of emotions she had just experienced. The glow that had enveloped Charles was fading, but the warmth of his presence lingered, wrapping around her like a soft blanket, providing comfort where there had once been fear. As the last remnants of the spectral light dimmed, Emily took a deep breath, allowing the peaceful atmosphere to fill her lungs. She glanced around the room, now bright and inviting, devoid of the shadows that had once haunted her. The scent of lilacs wafted through the air, reminding her of love lost and love regained, of connections that transcended time and space. With each step, she felt lighter, the burden of the past lifting from her shoulders. She moved through the house, feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from its very foundations. The creaking floors and aged walls whispered softly, revealing a newfound sense of harmony that had been absent since her arrival. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden rays through the windows, Emily found herself in the living room. The soft light painted the walls with warmth, transforming the space into a sanctuary rather than a place of fear. She sank onto the couch, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. With her mind racing, she pondered the connections she had forged in such a short time. The stories embedded in the walls were not just tales of sorrow, but of love that had endured through the years. Each room held echoes of laughter and whispers of affection, and now they felt alive with renewed purpose. Jake arrived home shortly after, his face a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Emily, are you okay?" he asked, noticing her tear-streaked cheeks and the serene look in her eyes. "I'm more than okay," she replied, a soft smile spreading across her lips. She shared her experiences with him, recounting the powerful encounters with Charles and Margaret, the way they had reached across the void to connect. She spoke of love, loss, and the importance of letting go, and she felt the weight of the house's history settle gently around them. Jake listened intently, his skepticism slowly melting away as Emily described the warmth that had filled the space. "Maybe there is something to this after all," he admitted, his expression shifting from doubt to understanding. "It sounds like you helped them find peace." With newfound conviction, Emily proposed a plan to honor the couple's memory. Together, they would create a small memorial in the garden, a place for reflection and connection, a symbol of love that transcended time. The thought ignited a spark of hope in her heart, and she felt a sense of purpose enveloping her. As they worked in the garden over the following weeks, planting flowers and arranging stones, the atmosphere around the house changed even further. Neighbors began to notice the revitalization, and word spread about the couple who had once lived there. People shared their own stories, revealing a history intertwined with the Wiggins, their lives touched by the lingering spirits. Emily and Jake organized a small gathering to celebrate the love that had once filled the house, inviting friends and neighbors to share in the joy of connection. They decorated the garden with twinkling lights, laughter echoing into the night as people shared stories of love and loss, their voices mingling with the soft rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind. As the gathering continued, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey she had undertaken. She watched as the garden blossomed, its flowers vibrant and alive, each petal a reminder of the lives intertwined within the walls of their home. The once ominous presence of the house had transformed into a sanctuary of memories, a safe haven for those seeking solace. That night, as Emily prepared for bed, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. The air around her was still, the shadows no longer threatening but comforting. As she drifted off to sleep, she dreamt of Charles and Margaret, their forms illuminated by a warm glow, walking hand in hand through a garden blooming with lilacs, their laughter echoing like music. The house stood firm against the night, its walls infused with the love that had triumphed over sorrow. And in that moment, Emily understood the true power of connection, the ability to reach beyond the veil, to touch the hearts of those who had come before, and to honor the memories that shaped their lives. As dawn broke once more, the world outside shimmered with possibility. Emily awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to embrace the stories waiting to be uncovered, the lives yet to be touched. And she knew deep down that the love shared within the walls of her home would continue to resonate, not just in whispers of the past, but in the vibrant lives of those who chose to remember.